Hello, my name is Anat Admati, and I'm here recording another episode of our webinar on Power to Truth. Today I have with me Rohit Chopra, who until February 1st was the director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB. And in his background, he's also worked on MBA, two stints in the CFPB, and in between them, a term as a commissioner in the Federal Trade Commission, FTC, which does also consumer protection as well as anti-competitive, sort of anti-monopoly strategies, part of competition policy in the US. So Rohit is finishing today a 4-day visit at Stanford that included all kinds of things. There was an event that was videotaped yesterday for the Corporation Society Initiative that's sponsoring also this webinar series, and that will be posted. And in addition, Rohit participated in a few classes and a lot of meetings with faculty, with students, and other engagement in between all the other media that wanted to talk to him. I would like to actually bring out the most also freshest in my mind, some of the discussion that we had in class today with the MBA class that has also some students from other parts of campus. So when you started your comments in the class, you talked about what you and I share in terms of sort of what it takes to make markets work for society. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, one of the things that was so great about being at Stanford this week is that I really saw how so many of the students were thinking hard about what really is the point of studying management, studying to be a business leader, entrepreneur. And I think what we took away was that people were really interested in how markets were structured. Mm-hmm. Should they be dominated by just a couple of players, or do we want lots and lots of small firms? And I think that really guided our discussion about what should regulation look like? What should it do to make sure that we're securing our democratic values while also incubating lots of commercial activity that builds prosperity for people?
Yeah, and there was a question of what should be allowed. What does it mean to be free in market to do what, and what's appropriate to do in markets? So that was sort of part of it, because these agencies were trying to figure that out and sort of make rules around that and enforce rules around what's allowed and not allowed, specifically with respect to consumer and other sort of business practices that, at some point you would be deemed unfair to competition and to consumers. So how do you deal with the trade-offs related to that?
Well, one of the things we talked about all this week was that how are people gaining a competitive edge? And to what extent is that edge breaking the law? One of the things that was a topic of discussion in our MBA class was the issue of dark patterns. These are deceptive or manipulative devices used online to get consumers to make a choice they wouldn't otherwise want to make. And we've all seen this, the dozens of screens or getting transferred from call center agent to another when you're trying to cancel a subscription. So I'm not really sure we should be training people on how to design manipulative devices to lock in consumers. We should really be training people who are making the customer experience better. So that's really what we discussed, is how the rules, how prohibiting things like deceptive dark patterns, prohibiting exploitations of power or information actually is foundational for creating more discoveries and more opportunities.
So that the innovation is not an innovation of sort of regulatory arbitrage and ways to kind of deceive people, but actually something that's good for society, not just a way to trap people and to prevent competitors from being able to come in or whatever. And that has to do too with overly complex regulation that also came up, et cetera. So you later in the class talked about specific things related to market power, for example, with Apple. Can you speak to that particular case?
Well, there was a lot of interest from students at Stanford about what does the future of technology look like. Many expressed how they want to start a technology firm. And a lot of issues came up. One was it's really hard when you can only raise capital from venture capital or other investors with the specific goal of selling to one of the top incumbents.
Right.
I think when we reflect upon what we want to see in America, we actually want to see the new players unseat the dominant incumbents. And we talked about in the classes about maybe it was one of the reasons we have a Google, an Amazon, and others is because of the government's antitrust action in the 1990s against Microsoft, who tried to hijack really the future of desktop computing. So I think we also thought a lot about what is the point of banks? Is the point of innovation in banks to try and convince people to borrow for something they don't want, or to try and get them to pay a fee for a non-existent service? Is that innovation, or are we trying to make sure that financial firms, that banks are doing the lending to companies who are creating products, hiring workers, and building? And I think that really is not simply a question of free markets. That's really a reflection too of policy.
Yep.
And it's why MBA students, it's why others have to think about what is the environment and policy structure that will create the most competition and decentralized power.
Yeah, I mean, in banking, which is an area I know about, some of the rules are just actually pushing in the wrong direction, and they were written on, to favor
the dominant players. The rules
and the government.
Rules are rigged in the favor of everyone except the entrepreneurs and the consumer.
Including the fact that they would favor lending to governments over lending to businesses. And so, there's sort of little ways in which the policies is rigged that way, and then it muddles the whole debate about what the rules should be. So go back to the Apple example specifically.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, well, I think we heard specifically.
Yeah.
I got a lot of questions about what are the regulations in which we operate under. And we often think about that in terms of regulations developed through the democratic process, through agencies, through elected officials. But there's also a lot of private regulations. These are the rules imposed on consumers or on other firms by the big players. So, for example, we all agree to reams and reams of fine print whenever we're using an app store or wherever we're using many types of digital services. And we talked a lot about Apple's regulations. The CFPB, while I was director, did a report about the regulations imposed by Apple and Google when it comes to digital payments. Apple charges a tax or a toll on all of the payments flowing through its Apple Pay product. And it has really, I think, inhibited innovation when it comes to lower cost, fast and seamless payments. So we got to ask ourselves, how are we training business school students? Are we training them to create moats where they are protecting the incumbency power of the biggest market players? Or are we creating mechanisms to make sure that those big players are sweating about the new startup behind them?
Yeah, and so the issue is you can't get the good rules if the sentiment is that somehow all rules are bad and they are kind of costly, just a word, without considering, who it's costly for and how the system as a whole looks like, with or without the particular rules, and that, who should be making them. So on the democratic process, you also asked, oh, can the public really understand these things? Can the politicians really understand these things? And you had some good answer about, how we shouldn't really want that, but we should want, still good rules.
Yeah, I think we talked a lot in our classes this week about how do we make sure that individual consumers, how individual entrepreneurs, how can we make sure they know their rights and how can they protect themselves? And that I think is important. But we also need to make sure that when you are boarding a plane,
Right.
that you don't have to go through a checklist to check for yourself if that plane is safe.
Right.
You should not have to enter an elevator and do your own investigation if it is safe. We need to make sure that products and services are reducing the search time, the headache.
It's more efficient that way.
Yeah, and in fact, we want the competitive market to be something where you can trust that a transaction is going to work.
Right.
And I think that that is something that a lot of the students talked through. Wait, maybe we actually want bright line rules. I favor that. And even if that means banning certain types of practices that under very some conditions could be good, there's also simplicity and ease of enforcement.
Yeah. So the fact that complicated rules are in themselves excluding small players because it's the cost of compliance is so.
That's right.
Such infrastructure associated with just basic compliance, and sometimes the big players like the rules to be.
And when I was visited the law school as well, I mean, we don't want to be training lawyers at any institution on how they can rig the system in favor of the biggest players. We want them to be officers of the court, to be ones who think through what are the ways in which law can actually be really harmonious with promoting a democratic society and a prosperous one.
But everywhere in these professional schools, of course, there are the incentives once they're out in terms of who pays them and what are they paid to do very, very specifically, who hired them to do what. And then that's where the tension starts to build. So I think, you will probably share what I've been trying to tell people here at the business school. We have to always maintain in our heads kind of the big picture of whatever it is we're doing, because otherwise we kind of get lost in the narrow objectives. Would you not say that? I mean, in terms of business education.
Yeah, I think we want to arm anyone with a business or management education to think about their career as they should lead or start initiatives, businesses, others, really with the goal of not just embracing the status quo, not just protecting the existing centers of power, but really to create new opportunities. And we had so many discussions this week about the role of ethics.
Yeah.
And we heard students ask questions, how should I think about when I see my own employer engaging in unethical conduct?
Right.
And it's a tough question because one of the ways in which we can make sure that it's not a race to the bottom is to have sensible safeguards in our laws that are enforced so that there is some.
Less of these dilemmas.
That's right.
Yeah. Because that's kind of the problem. It's like if there's a rule, we collectively commit to something, as opposed to everybody having to struggle, and then the competition, wins.
That's right. And you lose your edge. You sacrifice real. And I really enjoyed meeting your students from all over the world.
Yeah.
And what I shared about what I thought was important about America was that the economic progress we made was not because we were asleep at the switch when it came to rules. We actually created securities laws, banking laws, food safety laws, and so much to create markets and shape markets in ways that provided confidence and frankly attracted capital from around the world to offer products and services to our people.
And beyond. Yeah, that's right. You have a lot of insights. You have a lot of great experience, and it's been so important for our students to engage with you, and for the faculty to engage with you during your time here. So I hope you come back. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, and it was a real pleasure.
Yeah.